So this morning I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Ott Marshall, who has a master's from Notre Dame, a Ph.D. from Vanderbilt, go Doors, and she's a professor of Christian ethics and conflict transformation at Candler School of Theology at Emory University. She focuses on contemporary Christian ethics with particular attention to violence, peace building, conflict transformation, gender, and moral agency. She's edited 3 volumes and written 3 books, including Parenting for a Better World and an Introduction to Christian Ethics, Conflict, Faith, and Human Life. She worships with her family at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and this year she is on sabbatical from the Candler School of Theology. But she graciously agreed to come and speak to us today, and we hope that this is an appropriate time as everyone is going through the events of the past week and dealing with whatever issues and whatever thoughts you have, and as all of us face Thanksgiving Day coming up with a lot of family members, whatever way that breaks. So thank you for that. And at a time when it seems to many conflict around us, both abroad and domestically in our nation, in our communities, in our homes, we're thankful and eager to hear her timely message about conflict transformation. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Ott Marshall. Thank you.
Not having Nick speak, he's just going to be in charge of questions later. Good morning. Good morning. It's really nice to be with you. I'm so grateful for the invitation. When I accepted it, I didn't realize that the election would be over this Sunday. I assumed very much that we would still be in some counting and recounting process, so I'm a bit surprised by that, but still, hi. Very happy to be here with you. I'm also realized that in the naming of my schools, probably the better alma mater to mention here is Davidson. I went to Davidson College, so good. I thought so, good Presbyterian school. So had a wonderful experience there and finished in 91, which is somehow 30 years ago. I don't know how that happens. Time just passes. So I am very much aware that purple spaces, like this one, where people feel profoundly connected to one another, a sense of community, a commitment to relationship, a willingness to share a space and wrestle together with what is unfolding in our nation, what has been, what the future is, and also who we're called to be by God. These are precious spaces. They're sort of few and far between. I think they're precious in that sense. And so I don't take it for granted being invited into yours, and I hope that what I bring is helpful to you and also sort of worthy of this space and time together. So I see a few familiar faces, but many of you I do not know, so I thought I would begin. Bo is here. Where's Bo? Yeah, hey Bo. I'm on leave, so I'm not seeing my colleagues, so this is a big deal. Bo, Joel, this is awesome. Yeah. So I thought it'd be important to make a few assumptions clear. So the first one is that the conflicts that we're experiencing in a really pronounced way, this sort of heightened sense of conflict, heightened division, all of this stuff has been with us for a long time, and I mean before 2015, right? It's been with us a long time and will be with us a long time into the future. That there's nothing, there's an adage in interpersonal conflict where we say it's never about the dishes, right? When people are arguing at home and they're talking about the dishes, it's never about the dishes. And in church, where we fight over hymnals, we know it's never about the hymnal, right? There's always something deeper going on, and it's the same thing now on a much broader scale. All of our fights are not about Trump and Harris and elections up and down the ballot. There's something much deeper going on, right? And so this work of discernment, what's really going on, what's underneath the dishes, that's long haul work, right? And it's something we can only do together. So that's the first assumption. Second assumption is that we can do more than one thing at a time. So I'm going to be talking a lot this morning about practicing curiosity, asking open questions, trying that really hard work of deep listening, right? That's one of many things I think we need to be doing As much as I rail about multitasking these days, it's true that we can multitask and we need to. So we need to ask open questions, practice curiosity, and also we need to really fiercely advocate for things that are attached to the values we hold deeply. And we need to do good works of mercy and service in the world. And we need to gather for worship, right? We need to do all of these things. So what I'm going to lean into is one of many things I think we need to be doing now. The third assumption is just this fundamental bedrock conviction that God is always and everywhere doing a new thing, right? Even when circumstances seem intractable, conflict feels unmovable, intransigent, right? When things seem to be moving too slowly or moving too quickly in a direction you don't like, right? In all of those circumstances, God is always present, ever gracious, always doing a new thing. And so our work is to try to discern what God is doing, right? Even in divisive, conflictual times. Figure out what new and good thing might emerge, right? With faith in God and a grounding in God's grace. So those are assumptions. All right, now, as I ramble on about that, I'm remembering that several years ago, I had a conversation with a journalist who was telling me that she hates interviewing academics because we meander around forever and ever and ever and eventually get to the point, like, several hours into the future. So I'm not going to do that. So here's my main point. There it is. That I think the very best way for us to practice God's grace, enact God's grace, reflect God's grace in such a divisive and conflictual time is to try to practice curiosity. That what we know from studying violently divided societies and what we know from studying just interpersonal conflict is that when we're in these moments of division and conflict, we stop being curious about the other side, whatever that is. Right? And now we have many other sides. So I'm going to try to use the language of an other side, be curious about an other side, because they're not just two, right? It's a multidimensional conflict there, and I have many other sides. So that's, I think, the main point here. We've got to try to practice being curious, practice a disposition of curiosity. And I think that's important not only because we know from studying violence and conflict that it's a disposition that falls away, right? So we have to work really hard to enact it. But also it's important because it's really, again, this way that we reflect God's grace in the world. I think grace gives us a kind of foundation from which to do hard and scary things. If we can remember the gift that no matter what we've done, God embraces us and surrounds us with a kind of love that we do not deserve, that gives us not only a remarkable sense of foundation, right? It holds us, but it also enables us to do things that are scary and hard. Other reason why we need to do this is that we are constantly in a process of formation, right? We are constantly being formed by our environment. This is something I'm going to talk more about in a minute. But we have to think about practicing curiosity as cultivating that disposition that orients us toward one another, right? Formation. So that's the main point. We're going to practice curiosity. And we're going to see it as a way of reflecting God's grace in the world. All right. Okay, got my assumptions out, my point out. I wanted to give you an image to think about. So some of you might have rugs or things like this in your house. This look familiar. So my great-grandmother, whose name was Carrie Annabelle Hughes Rocky Watterson, a long name, she used to make these braided rugs. And she would, like quilters do, harvest fabric from lots of different things, and she'd cut them into strips, and then she'd stitch the strips together, and then she'd wind the strips into these balls, and then she would weave the balls together into these rugs. So it's constantly stitching and weaving, right? So we have several of these around our house. This one it is in its state, its unfinished state, in what used to be her suitcase, which now sits in my closet. So you might have these in different places around your house, attics, closets, suitcases, on display, in use. So I can't do this, this craft. I don't have the dexterity of a seamstress, for one thing, but I've never done this, but I realize that I do this same thing all the time with ideas and traditions, right, and experiences, that I'm forever learning something over here and learning something over here and remembering this thing and braiding them together, right? That is forever what I'm doing. And that's what we're going to do this morning. So we're going to think about 3 things that I have named already. And each of these things, each of these fabrics, they represent, sometimes it's a tradition, sometimes it's a school of thought, sometimes it's a set of resources, right? But they're just fabrics that we're going to sort of piece together and then weave together into a kind of, you're going to hate this, but a kind of curiosity carpet, right? We're just going to use that phrase. All right, so formation, which I mentioned, skills for healthy conflict. So these are things we've learned by studying violence and by practicing things like negotiation, mediation. So if any of you were ever peer mediators in your background or sat through any kind of mediation, some of the main points will be familiar here. And the third is contemplative practice. So we want to think about this work of asking good questions and listening deeply, not just as something that's forming our character, although it is that, not just as skills that are helpful, although it is those, but also we want to think about curiosity, questions, and listening as spiritual disciplines, right? They're rooted for us. And part of the reason why they're hard is because they're spiritual disciplines. This is really hard work. All right, so formation. Oh, sorry, Milo. There we go. One more. Where should I be pointing this? Over here? There we go. I keep trying to point it at the screen. That's wrong. All right, so formation. All right, so formation is something we know a lot about, and I think one way to sort of get into it quickly is to think about how concerned we are about our kids and technology, right? We're very attentive to the ways that our kids are being formed through this, right? Through social media. Well, we know it's not just our kids. We're all being formed all the time by our environment. It's impacting us in all kinds of ways. I went last summer for a massage, and I said, well, I got all this tension in my neck. And she said, no, you have text neck. And I was like, oh, come on. Text neck, that's the most humiliating diagnosis. I do not have. I said, can we just call it reading neck? I mean, it's the same. Like, I've been reading. But at any rate, so our environment's always forming us, right? It's shaping our bodies, our posture, but it's also shaping us cognitively, emotionally, socially, formation. So what's encouraging about this, though, is that formation is not just a passive experience, right? We're not just being formed. We can actively participate in our formation. So the whole tradition in my field of ethics around virtue ethics is very much oriented this way. Right? The virtue ethics is this long-standing philosophical tradition, predates Christianity. And it says that we can shape habits and dispositions that orient us toward a goal. And it's this ongoing work of habit formation. We use that language now. I mean, virtue ethics is kind of having a comeback because of this cultural attention to healthy habits, right? So we talk a lot about, well, we want to be healthier, and we do that by developing a habit in 28 days, right? We have that kind of sense, right? We know that's not true, that's not really what happens, but it is that kind of awareness of connection between who we are, bless you, who we are, and the actions that we do, that connection between being and activity, right? That what we do shapes the person we're becoming. Okay, so if we bring that fabric kind of into our thread, then we can see how curiosity takes on another kind of weight to it, like a little more weight to it. So we're thinking now not just about asking a question as though it's doing a thing I need to do in my list of things I need to do, but we're thinking about asking questions as contributing to a shape of character, right? that practicing curiosity becomes who I am as a person, right? I am determined to be curious about something that scares me. I'm determined to be curious about a claim that threatens something I believe in, right? I'm determined to be curious. So that kind of rhythm, just like I'm determined to drink less coffee, I'm determined, right? This kind of things that we do for our body, we also do for our whole being, developing these habits. So curiosity, I want you to think about that as one of these. How do we practice curiosity? Now, what's key in virtue ethics and in our more contemporary formulations of this is that we are forming character with a purpose in mind, right? So I'm trying to drink less coffee so that I feel better and less jittery and I'm less of a grouch when I get irritable, right? There are reasons I have goals for these things. I want my kids to think thoughtfully about their interaction with technology so that they use it as a source for learning and engaging the world and building community and not withdrawing from everything, right? There's a purpose that we have. So for curiosity, I've been thinking, again, to ground it back in grace, that we know that we receive God's grace not just for ourselves. It's not just a gift that I'm given and I'm invited to keep just for me. This special knowledge that God loves me no matter what. That's not the end of grace, right? That's the start, right? I receive the gift and then I join in a process of trying to move toward communion with God and with others, right? Grace is this process. I receive this gift and I live it out. I enact it by trying to gather in community, foster community, cultivate communion with God and others, right? That's the purpose. So then let's go back and think about curiosity, right? If curiosity is connected to all those pieces, then it's not just about me forming a more curious character, but it is about me practicing a kind of curiosity about others so that I can be in communion with them and with God, right? It becomes sort of woven in. All right. I'm not being rude, I just need to check my time. All right. So, formation, that's all great and makes sense and also feels a little bit lofty, I think. So this is where some really pragmatic skills come in. As I've said a few times, what we know from studying violently divided societies and also conflictual relationships and communities is that we stop being curious. And one of the reasons why we stop being curious is because we rely on narratives about other people, right? And we let those narratives do the work of knowledge. So I don't need to be curious about that other side because I know what they're about. I know all about them. I know their hopes, I know their fears, I know who they're demonizing and why, right? I know everything about them. Now, I am as guilty of this as anybody. And my family, who is just gathering evidence for a massive tell-all book on me one day, could tell you all of the ways in which I participate in this narrative, the power of the narrative. And it's kind of, the other side is the worst version of themselves, and I am the best version of myself, right? That's how narratives work. So they are important because they ground us a bit, they remind us who we are, and boy, they are incomplete and powerful and operating. And so we're living out according to these narratives, right? So that's a really important lesson. It's something we know because we do it, and it's also something that we know because we've studied fragmented societies and see how it operates on a large scale. All right. So that's a key lesson. Narratives are operating, powerful, and always incomplete. The second key lesson is language, and it relates to the, it's not about the dishes point. This is language, the episode in Epicenter one comes from John Paul Lederach, who's a Mennonite who worked in conciliation for 40 years. And he, early on in his career, he started trying to talk about this thing that we do where we assume that the conflict is about the presenting issue and we don't dig underneath it. And so his language for that was this episode and epicenter. And he said that often what we're doing is reacting to episodes, right? Whether it's the dishes, and now it's the car, and now it's, all these different sort of things that pop up, things that we fight about, right? Those are episodes. And what we have to do is to think about what's underneath them. What's the epicenter that's driving it? So now, like this, our election battles, these are episodes. I mean, there's a reason why this feels familiar. We keep having the same fights because they're episodes, right? They're not the epicenter. And so to get to the epicenter requires curiosity. We have to try to find out what's really driving this, right? What's really at stake for this actual human being, not just what's the argument that I have locked into this narrative when I tell you why they voted the way they did, right? So we're trying to dig down to the epicenter. All right, so that's also a key lesson and requires curiosity and good questions and lots of conflict analysis, right? Trying to understand. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I'm kind of tired of analysis right now, honestly. There's just a lot of analysis and it's kind of exhausting. So maybe what we need is conversation and a little bit less analysis. All right, last point. So I don't do large scale, I'm not a large scale negotiator, mediator. That's not my world. International conflict, that's not my world. I'm also not a certified mediator, so I don't sit between two people very often. But the work I do and find really meaningful is very small scale group work. So it can be a circle of 6 people, 8 people, maybe 10 people. And we sit together and we do all kinds of work in that circle. Understanding, decision making, redressing harms, right? All kinds of things happen in that circle. And I am endlessly amazed at the power of a good question in that circle. And it's not, again, this is a skill, it's like it's documented as it's a thing, but it's also something that you just experience, right? When someone asks a question that has the power of opening a space that was closed, it feels like the Spirit of God just came into the room. It has that kind of power to it. And you just see it. People open up, they look at each other that they have not been looking at before, right? The posture changes, the tone changes, everything changes. So why do those questions do that? Well, they're open questions, that's the phrase. And you know what an open question is. It's invitational in nature, right? It's not a kind of gotcha question. It's not a preliminary to the pounce, right? It's an open question. It's also a non-judgmental question. So in conflict, we do actually ask questions all the time, but they're not questions. I mean, we say things like, what were you thinking, right? How could you do that? These are questions, but they're not questions, right? So those are not the kinds of questions we're talking about. We're talking about elicitive questions that open up a space that are non-judgmental. I think one of the keys, and we're going to look at some questions in a minute, I think one of the keys right now is to not ask questions about those presenting issues. The question, why did you vote for Harris? Or why did you vote for Trump? Or why did you not vote for that referendum? Those are the questions that keep us up at the episode, right? They're not helping us to get underneath. So we want to think about questions that are more open, more elicitive, and are getting us past the dishes, getting us down into the epicenter. Right. Okay, last little fabric, and then we'll look at some questions. So as I said, this is the bedrock around all of this is an understanding of grace as a gift that anchors us, secures us, and also a gift that we can't keep to ourselves, right? We have to share it. We have to reflect God's grace in the world. And so one of the ways we do that is through paying attention to the world, right? Through the work of contemplative practice, these spiritual disciplines of attentiveness, of listening. I mean, what we're doing in those practices is not only, enjoying some respite that we really need for all kinds of reasons, but we're also opening ourselves up in a kind of posture of receptivity, right? So it's, again, changing our posture in the world. We go through so much of our day being busy, thinking about the to-do list, thinking about the clock, multitasking, all these things, and often like this, I spend a lot of my day like this, And these moments of contemplative practice, a spiritual discipline, we change our posture, right? One of the things that fascinates me about conflict is that when we are in a moment of heightened conflict, all of the mechanisms in our body that we need to learn shut down. So, and all of the mechanisms in our body that we need to receive something new shut down. Even if you love conflict, these systems shut down in you, right? You're thinking about an argument for defense or an argument for attack. You're feeling kind of the energy in your body, which is either about pouncing, moving forward, or freezing, right? Your shoulders get tense, your heart races, you stop breathing deeply, your body just knots. What we have to do for all this stuff we've been talking about is remember the postures that we move into in prayer, right? Which are postures of trust and receptivity and openness. It's a whole different posture of our body and our being, right? So if we can weave that fabric in, now we have another kind of layer, right? And hopefully something that's familiar, so that curiosity doesn't become something that you import into your faith life because some peace builder told you it was a good thing you needed to do now, but curiosity becomes an expression of your faith life, right? A mode of contemplative practice, right? So in the same ways you might walk around this lovely campus in a posture of attentiveness, right? Remembering the beauty of nature and breathing that in, you want to transfer that posture into a space where it has not been occupying and is not natural, right? You're going to disrupt that space with a very different kind of posture of openness and receptivity. All right, again, we're just going to return to the first point, which is that grace makes all of this possible. Right? And I really mean that in a very deep way. I think when we are in these moments of division and conflict, again, even if you love conflict, if it's your thing, right? Even if that's true for you, you are functioning in a mode that's about attack and drive, right? And you're functioning with an awareness of threat. What grace does is pull us out of that, right? God's grace reminds us that we are enfolded in love. We don't deserve, right? We have this bedrock that should, if we're breathing it in deeply, help us to feel more secure, right? And then from that secure, more secure posture, we can open for receptivity, right? To receive something new. All of this takes a lot of risk and vulnerability, and we can't do that when we're feeling fearful. So I shouldn't admit this in front of my biblical studies colleagues, but maybe you guys can help me find some great texts on curiosity in Scripture. I didn't find a lot of them. I was hoping to find be curious, it's right there, I missed it. So maybe you guys can correct me. But one of the strong themes in Scripture is be not afraid, right? Fear not. That is all over our biblical texts. And I think if we can breathe that in and ground that in a posture of grace, then we can do these sort of scary and hard things. All right, so now I'm going to give you some homework. How am I doing on time, Nick? Are we okay? 9:30. We're okay? All right. Oh, sorry, this is my big wrap-up slide. I forgot. Again, here's our curiosity carpet. We're going to weave together these fabrics, practicing curiosity so that we can shape our character differently. I can share these slides, y'all can. So, feel free to take pictures, but I can also share the slides with Rebecca. Practice curiosity as a kind of shaping of our character. So these issues of formation, We're going to learn from peace builders and conflict workers about how to pose open questions, right? What that sounds like. And we're going to ground all of this as a spiritual discipline so that it's fueled by our faith life and contributes to our faith life, okay? That's our big carpet. All right, you set me up really well for this, Mike. Thanksgiving is coming. So we've got 2 actually important months ahead of us. We have the lead up to Thanksgiving and we have Advent, right? So what I want to invite you to do is to, in these 2 full months where you will have ample opportunity and also an invitation to really actively anticipate the coming of the Christ child, right? So we've got an interpersonal month in Thanksgiving in November, and we've got this rich spiritual attention month in December. I want you to talk to 1, maybe 2 people and ask them some good open questions. So I've got my 2 people in mind. One of them is someone I talk to all the time, but not about anything deep. We just totally stay away from that stuff, right? This is someone I love and adore and I'm with all the time, and we do not talk about it. So I'm going to try to interrupt that with him. The other person is someone that I don't talk to at all, haven't for a long time, and I don't want to be estranged from him anymore. And so I'm going to try to reach out and ask him some questions. So I've got my 2 people. So I want you to think about 1 or 2 people that you could ask some open questions to during November or December. All right, now I'm going to show you what my questions are. And this is not part of the assignment. You don't have to ask your person my questions, but I wanted to give you some examples. So I said a minute ago that I don't want to ask about the election. I don't want to ask about the presenting issues, right? Topics. I want to ask a deeper question. And so both of these people are Christian. They're very different kinds of Christians than I am. We worship very differently. We're different in all kinds of ways. But I want to ask them this question. What Christian conviction feels most important to you at this point in your life? And I want to ask them that because I want to go deep, but I also want to begin with something that is meaningful to them and a place of kind of comfort, if not joy, right? I would love for someone I disagree with to ask me this question, right? What Christian conviction is most important to you? I would love it if they would ask me it knowing that they're not getting ready to say, well, you know, I mean, that's what you worry when you hear this question or when you receive it. Oh, there's going to be a follow-up. That's the pounce, right? We're not doing that. We're not pouncing. It's not a gotcha question. I just want to know, what bedrock conviction do you have that's most important to you at this point in your life? And then I want to ask my people where they learned that, right? Where did it come from? And not just where is it in Scripture or where is it, you know, like who taught it to you in a narrow sense, but really where did you learn it? Like how did that conviction get kind of into your bones so that it really governs you, so that it feels really important? Like that's what I really want to know, right? Oh, and then I want to know, sorry, I keep blocking the screen, and then I want to know why that one conviction is so important now. Like of all the things you believe in, you gave me that one. Like why? Why is that the most important conviction right now? I'd like to know that. Now, this fourth, so teachers love multi-part questions, so I'm kind of cheating here. This is a little kind of if this, then that, and what if this, then the other one kind of thing. But I want to know if that core conviction is hard to put into practice these days. I want to ask my friends that. I also would love for somebody to ask me that. Somebody I disagree with to ask me that. And again, not in a frame that's, well, you're obviously not living out your faith, right? You're obviously not doing what you say, right? Not that. But is it hard? Like, are you wrestling with this? I'm profoundly wrestling with this, right? I am really, I believe, and it was my bedrock conviction, my assumption with you guys, that God is always and everywhere doing a new thing. And I am discouraged. I don't see a lot of hope and new things right now. I feel really discouraged, right? That is hard for me to live out, that bit of my faith that's so important right now. But I suspect that at least one of my people will say, nope, nothing hard about it. Maybe I'm not being fair to him, but I think that's true. So I want to ask him, when you are living it out, how do you feel? Right? When you feel like your life has that kind of integrity to it, that what you're doing is reflecting your deepest convictions, what does that feel like for you? Right? I'd like to ask him that. And then if you are struggling to live it out, can you share why? Why is it so hard? The last question is my very favorite last question. In any conversation, whether it's a formal circle process or casual conversation, is there anything else that you want me to know about you? Right? That's a really great question because maybe you guys have, I assume you've had this experience that you've ended a conversation not really being able to say what you wanted to say. And sometimes you can't say it because it wasn't safe to say it or it didn't seem the time to say it. But sometimes the person who was asking you questions didn't ask what you needed to be asked, right? So this question gets to that. Anything else you want me to know about you? A kind of wide open question. All right, so speaking of questions, we want some time for questions, yeah. So I'm gonna stop talking and Nick's gonna walk around with the mic, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing. Much needed. Ooh. Thank
Don't
you.
shout
That
at
was
us,
amazing
yeah.
and much needed. David French did a New York Times podcast on election night. He's a Republican and a Christian who openly did not vote for Trump. And he said that the two things that keep coming to mind for him on how to survive are one, to protect the vulnerable. That's fine, we can do that, I can do that. And two, to speak truth. So my question for you is, how do I and we speak truth when the truth that we feel deep inside that comes from our belief of Christ and Christ being radically loving, how do we speak that truth without alienating people or seeming judgmental of people
Yeah.
who don't agree with our truth?
Yeah. Tell me your name. Erin, yeah. Man, I always wish something like the first question should be an easy question. Yeah. I don't know. It's incredibly hard. You have to keep trying. Those are the things. The more fulsome response would be, I think that, again, we can do more than one thing at a time. And so, and the two things here are inevitably in some kind of tension, if not conflict, right? So I'm going to be curious and ask questions and be open. And I'm going to keep saying things I need to say. And those things are just in conflict, and you have to keep doing both of them. My hope is that through this sort of discipline of cultivating openness and curiosity, that in those spaces, it also makes it more likely that you can say what you need to say and it will not be an alienating experience, right? And the faith there, the hope that's there is grounded in a faith that if I practice a kind of grace towards someone else, that God will move in them to also be gracious toward me, right? And I don't know, that's not a guarantee. We can't control the efficacy of these actions we're taking, but that's the risk, and I think that's what it's grounded in.
Again, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. I might try to build on your answer a little bit. I'd love to see if you agree. Two things that have made a huge positive difference in my life is, number one, spend 10 minutes a day in silence, in silent prayer, just by yourself. And two is to find places that make you feel small and insignificant in a very good and healthy way. And that can be as simple as just going outside and staring up at the sky. But I've found that helps me I've struggled with temper all my life, and that helps me kind of move things in and out in a good way. And when I'm genuinely curious, when I really don't understand, say if we're talking, you come at it from a place of, I want to help John, not I'm going to attack you. So you get in these safe places pretty quickly.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, you're singing my song. I mean, I love breathing and nature are just essential elements of life. And when I get too busy and I ignore them, I feel it. And then you remember them when you, take a moment to breathe deeply, look at the sky. I've been fascinated with, are they Jarrow spiders? Is that am I saying the word right? So a walking path that I take has just been filled with these spiders. And I realized one day that I wasn't paying attention, and I walked right through a web of them. And I mean, you know how you watch those reels of those little videos of people freaking out? And I thought, someone's going to have this thing of this crazy woman on the trail trying to get all the spiders off. So the next couple walks, I thought, well, I'll just stay on the street. I won't go on the path. And about the same time, we were in a small conflict with our neighbor over something. And I realized one morning that I was trying to avoid my neighbor and the spiders. And I thought, okay, can't do this. So you got to walk where the spiders are and walk where the neighbor is, face your fears. But all of that's, made possible more possible by these, whatever you need to do to center down a little bit. Breathe. Thank you.
Thank you for this conversation. And I'm hoping we get to have conversations like this within this community with each other. And this sounds maybe like a trite question in terms of the gravity of our topic so far, but a lot of things you hear, and everything from marriage therapy to descriptions of stuck, rigid systems, is the absence or the loss of playfulness and humor.
Yeah.
And at a certain level, if you've got a stuck, rigid system, humor is really dangerous. It's often toxic. So is this someday we'll get to enough trust where playfulness and humor have a role, or is it it's kind of like a both and? Just any comments on that?
Yeah. Oh, no, I love that. I mean, I think in the same way that we do things that help us center down, I think we also need to do things that help us remember joy and bring a little levity. One of the, a strong lesson that comes out of interfaith work has been that sometimes you can't get people to sit down and talk about their beliefs, but they can do a project together. So sort of shared service work. And now right now, honestly, I think a lot of interfaith work is a little bit easier than intra-faith work. A lot of our sort of arguments with fellow Christians are harder to grapple with than like my Muslim friends. And so I think a same kind of thing that you might play with there. So there might be shared projects, but there might be also just shared fun. So we're going to do something, I know I'm fighting with you and we are really angry with one another or not trusting ourselves, but let's go, do something playful and healthfully stupid. I mean, something silly, right? Whimsical would be good. Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And I don't think it's something we need to wait for. I think it can be preliminary, definitely a both and move.
That reminds me of something that Fuller said, habitat community.
Mm-hmm.
We may not agree on infant baptism, but we can agree on the hammer. Let's have the theology of the hammer.
That's right. Yeah, that's great. That's great. I think wherever we can stitch those commonalities is really important. What can we... some of these open questions often are like things you ask people, like, what do you hope for? What do you love? What brings you joy? What brings you laughter? So you can also ask those kinds of things and fold them in.
Maybe I have time for one more. So I appreciate all your comments. I think that it is helpful if we're in the room with people who all of us are hearing what you've presented and learning about the questions. I'm really glad my husband and I are both here so we can practice them together.
That's
But-
the humor.
But do you ever, knowing you might be speaking with someone, like the two folks that you have mentioned, would you ever explain to them ahead of or during your conversation, here are some questions I'm going to ask you because I know whatever the next phrase is, we don't always agree, and share so that then they have a sense of where you're starting from?
That's really important. I think, especially in a conversation like this, transparency about our intentions is really important. So, and I mean, what I've been rehearsing with my people is one of them I can say, so-and-so, when I come see you next week, I'd really like for us to try to talk about the divisions that are underneath this election. And I know you and I are different, and we haven't been talking about that at all, and we talk about everything else, and I'd like to really try to talk about this. And so, and see, they know what I do too, so I can say, so I've been talking to groups that they need to do these things, and so I'm going to try to do one with you. Would you be willing to have a conversation with me? The other person, it will be a kind of out of the blue thing, and so I think what I need to do for him is just text and say, this person is actually closer to my husband, and he texted my husband on Wednesday and said, just texting in with a well check, how you doing? So I think that's my foot in the door, and I can say, I would like a well check, and can we have a conversation? But I think, yeah, being really transparent about your intentions, putting all this in your own language, and being honest about what you need and hope to get out of the conversation is important. And I think also, again, depending on what language makes sense for you and the other person, I think it's important to communicate that what you're seeking is not a debate, right? What you're seeking is a kind of heart-to-heart conversation that's way underneath all of the noise in our society right now. So, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Marshall.
Mm-hmm, you're welcome.
I know we don't always end adult ed with a homework assignment. Maybe we could start doing that, but we each have 2 months to go forth and accomplish that homework assignment. Thank you all for your time. I ask that we go forth in God's love with grace and curiosity. Amen.